Speaking of Courage podcast. Back in studio. What's up, Chase?
Doing it again, man.
Yeah, man. It's hard to do a re-intro when we just did it. Computer goes out.
Technical difficulties here.
Now we're trying to pretend that we didn't do it again the first time. So, Audie Murphy, part 3.
Part 3 of many.
All right, man. Where are we at now?
All right. So again, we're on the we're closing in on the German homeland. We're in France. Again, Audie's gone through. He fought in North Africa, or he served in North Africa. He fought in Sicily, the invasion of Italy, and now we're pushing through France. So it's October of 1944 at this point.
And what has he been through at this point as far as medals and stuff?
So again, he has by this point in our story, he's earned a Bronze Star with V for Valor, a Combat Infantryman's Badge, a Distinguished Service Cross, and then his European Campaign Medals, Good Conduct, all the other non-valor medals.
And he's just coming off the Silver Star?
Correct. So the Silver Star was where we closed off last time. We were fighting in a rock quarry, basically in France, where the Germans were dug in and we were held. We were stalled in that area, and that was where, if you remember, as we talked about in the last one, he rescued his lieutenant colonel, his battalion commander, as they were stuck in this rock quarry as they got ambushed. So that's going to be the area we're in. As we're closing in on Germany, we're dealing with the Germans are going to be fighting much harder for their homeland. The civilians are going to be less friendly, because they're ethnically German in some of these areas.
Now it's an outside attack coming into my home.
Exactly. So they've been winning the war for a long period of time too, and they felt comfortable. And now you're starting to see the enemy come in, and they're going to be afraid of us. They're going to have hatred towards us. And
how is their culture as far as like pride and everything?
Oh yeah, the Germans are traditionally very militaristic, and that's what it was in the early part of the war. That's part of what the war was Lebensraum, living room. They were annexing Austria and the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia, because even though they're in other countries, those are Germans by ethnicity, is what they were saying. Yeah. They were able to use that to gain some of these territories. So.
Okay. So they're going toward the German border now.
Correct. So we're closing in. We're trying to make that final push. We're trying to end the war as rapidly as possible. The way you end the war is getting to Berlin. The way you get to Berlin is by killing Germans and fighting, right? So if you remember on our last episode, October 2nd is when he earned his Silver Star in this rock quarry. During that incident, the Americans that were attacked, that were pinned down, there was a sniper that was harassing that element. So after he earned his Silver Star, Audie went down and resupplied, and then he moved back on foot by himself to go get the sniper. So as he's moving...
What makes him think he's going to be able to find a sniper?
Because he's Audie Murphy.
Yeah.
I think a lot...
Those are those differences, huh?
When you read about him, there's a lot of his medals and a lot of his actions where he knew his skill and he didn't want to send anyone else to do a job that he could do, or he didn't want to put somebody else in harm's way. He knows if this German's alive, or if this sniper's out there, that his men are constantly going to be in danger of this.
Yeah.
If he sends someone else to do it, they might not have the skill, and he knows that he does. He knows he's a good shot. He knows the territory. He's been doing this for a while. It's not just this magical skill. He's been in combat for over a year now, and some of these newer guys aren't going to know that.
So he's got that confidence to where he's like, I don't trust anyone else to do it.
Right, exactly.
I need to be the one to do it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So he moves up through this area, and this is like almost like an old Western duel from long distances. Yeah. The German is going to be aware that he's there, and he's aware that the German's there. So
but the German's pinned down in a hiding spot.
Correct. But Audie has the audacity to do it, and audacity wins the day. As he's moving through the area, he hears the leaves rustle, which is the German trying to get into position to shoot him, and that's all Audie needed. So Audie's able to pinpoint his position. He fires his carbine twice, and he shoots the German in the head, and he kills him. After he does so, he takes his sniper rifle, the German's rifle, which he keeps throughout the war, and he ends up, there's pictures of him after the war showing his sister the German sniper rifle.
So he got to take that home.
You could put a postage stamp on anything and mail it home in
really?
World War II. Yeah, I'd literally just throw a postage stamp on it.
Can you imagine you in World War II?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, I tried to get everything I could in Iraq, and there wasn't anything good left. But, yeah exactly. You could literally take a German helmet. You didn't even have to put it in a box. You could just put your address on it, and then they'd send it home for free for you. So,
what?
Yeah, there's an old saying. I think it's the British fight for glory, the French fight for something, and Americans fight for souvenirs. That's the old saying.
Oh, I couldn't imagine you out there, bro.
I definitely fall into that. Getting everything you can.
Yeah.
So again, we're advancing. The Germans are falling back because they have to, because they're losing. But Germans don't ever retreat haphazardly. Germans are very organized. They were, whatever else you want to say about them, they were awesome soldiers. So they don't turn their backs and run. They're going to fall back. They're going to have a covering element, and they're going to bound backwards, basically. So in large-scale actions and in small-scale actions. So the Germans are going to be falling back. After this quarry, they're going to start to retreat, and the Americans are going to advance. So for a while, you're going to have that good movement. But again, The Germans are going to set up a machine gun position. The Germans are going to be occupying this territory. So as the Americans are moving through, the Germans are going to wait until you're in a disadvantageous position, and they're going to open fire on you when you're in the open. So 2 days after this is going to be October 5th. The Americans are moving through an area, and there's a 6-man patrol, and the Germans are going to open up from a fortified machine gun position. As soon as they open up, the guys that are exposed, 4 of them are going to fall dead or wounded. Because, again, they're in that exposed position. You're just walking. The Germans know you're there, or the enemy knows you're there. You're just waiting, hoping you see them first, which is unlikely. So 4 of them are going to fall down.
Dead
and wounded, yeah. As is always the case, you're going to fall down. You're going to look for where the enemy's coming from. You're going to try to communicate. You're going to try to do all these things, but you don't want to be the guy to pick your head up. You don't want to be the guy to move. If you expose yourself, they're going to cut you down. You're going to make yourself a target. So while everybody else is looking around, everybody else is trying to take assessment of the situation, trying to figure it out, Audie Murphy takes it upon himself. He starts crawling. He's crawling close to the German position. He gets so close, he later said he thought they were going to hear him because his teeth were chattering, because he was so cold. His teeth were just, chattering away.
Yeah.
So he creeps up as close as he can, and he finds a German sentry, the German guard that's basically guarding this position, and he waits for the German to peek his head around, and Audie fires once and shoots him in the head and kills him. Audie crawls closer, and he sees that there's over 40 Germans in this position, right, that these Americans are going to have to take. So he starts calling artillery fire. He's got his radio with him, and this is where that skill comes in. This is where Audie being able to fix a position, know where he's at, and guide that fire in. So Audie starts calling for fire. Audie drops his radio at one point. A German comes around a tree to attack him. Audie drops the radio and shoots him through the throat because he's able to...
The German radio guy?
Audie has the radio. He shoots the German. A German sees him because they're starting to take fire, right? They're trying to see where this artillery is coming from. So he comes around to try to destroy Audie. Audie immediately drops his radio, picks up his carbine, is able to shoot him through the throat and kills him. And Audie ended up calling for fire for over an hour in this exposed position. And at the end of it, he killed 15 Germans and wounded 35. And for this action, he was awarded another Silver Star. So his first Silver Star was October 2nd, and this was October 5th.
3 days later?
Yeah. And part of the citation here... First Lieutenant Murphy, carrying an SCR 536 radio, crawled 50 yards under severe enemy and machine gun fire to a point 200 yards from the strongly entrenched enemy who had prevented further advance. So again, 50 yards, he's crawling while the Germans are shooting at him. They're shooting at everybody, but he's crawling under fire, and then he gets within 200 yards of their entrenched position. Despite machine gun and rifle bullets that hit as close as a foot to him, Lieutenant Murphy called it direct artillery fire on the enemy positions for an hour, killing 15 Germans and inflicting approximately 35 additional casualties. His courage, audacity, and accuracy enabled his company to advance and obtain its objective. Again, all these guys that are there would have had to take that position. That's 50 Germans that are in that area. But Audie, not just courage, but like they said, audacity. Because you can be brave and know it's stupid to move across that area, but he's got this audacity. He knows his skill, so he starts moving forward. He's not calling anyone to come with him.
Yeah.
He's not saying, you guys take that, which he's more than within his rights to do. He's a senior enlisted guy at this point. The citations say lieutenant, because by the time he was awarded him, he was a lieutenant.
Yeah.
But he also has the skill to do it when he gets there. He has the skill to put down fire with his rifle, and he has the skill to accurately pinpoint those rifle
And his
rounds.
actions, dude, are like not just to save himself, but you think about like with the ones he's done so far, how many lives they've saved.
Well, they're the opposite of trying to save himself.
Yeah,
he's
saving everybody
Every time
else.
he's doing it, it's literally, I'm going from I might die to a really good chance I'm going to get cut down when I move across this field, but I don't care. I'm going to do it.
But if I don't do it, the implication of that is
Right.
crazy. Seems like every action so far has been like, you don't take down that sniper's going to take out a lot of people.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
If you don't take down that sniper, the sniper's going to take down that people. He literally, on this one, 50 Germans,
Yeah.
at least 50 Germans, and he just crawls towards them, right? Who in their right mind is going to leave your friends, leave your guys, crawl across an open area to single-handedly attack 50 guys?
That's
Now, he's
crazy.
using the artillery fire to do it, but he's engaging, too.
Yeah.
He moved close enough to shoot one in the head, so they know he's there, and then
Yeah.
to shoot another through the throat and to stay on the line. There's just that nerves of steel is
That
what
is
he has.
crazy.
And again, one of my favorite things about Audie is he said multiple times, I was scared every time we moved into combat. He's not this big buff bravado guy. He literally said, I was
Not a tough
scared.
guy like that.
Scared every single time, you know? It felt like somebody put their cold hands in my intestines and started to twist them, is what he'd say. But when you get scared, that's when you better get busy doing something, is what he
And
said.
when you're getting busy, he's probably sharp. It heightens all his senses.
Right. And that's
makes
that.
him very dangerous when you're willing to just do it.
And he's a man of action, like I've talked about a lot of times. It's that 0 to 60, right?
Yeah.
If you stop, and you sit there and you try to figure out what to do, and you hem and you haw, people are going to be getting cut down, and then your options are becoming more limited, and then you're struggling even more. But he just starts moving forward, right?
Yep.
Best thing to do is the right thing. The next best thing to do is the wrong thing, but the worst thing to do is nothing. Just move forward and get something done. So he moves forward, and if he dies in the attempt, it is what it is. But he's so good and he's so practiced with this, and sometimes that audacity is what's going to win the day.
And that's what I mean with a lot of these. Sometimes it sounds lucky. He sounds less lucky to me.
Yeah, that's very true.
Know?
Right. Yeah, some of them it is luck. With him, and like I said, if you're the Germans and you're not going to expect an American to come straight at you this way, so you might not even be paying attention over there, because
Like,
of course they're not. They're going to come over here. Yeah, and then all of a sudden this little guy's bounding up towards you. Yeah, and he's so good with his rifle, you don't get to make a mistake with Audie Murphy. So this is still October. We start moving forward. Again, we're advancing towards Berlin. The Soviets are coming from the east. We're coming from the west. We're closing these pincers on the German homeland. And the Germans, who've been fighting for years and years, are fighting their last desperate battle. In addition to fighting the Germans, we're also fighting the weather. The weather's starting to get colder, right? It's starting to snow. It's starting to be ice on the ground, which is just miserable for the infantry.
Oh, I couldn't even imagine.
Think about it now when you go camping. We have Gore-Tex and stuff. These guys are wearing wool. You have wool socks.
Yeah.
You know, you have crappy leather boots. You have your field jackets and stuff, but that's not going to, you get those wet once and then you just have a wet blanket on you, basically. When you dig into the ground, if a lot of people have not slept outside, I realize that. Even if you slept in tents, it's different. When I was in the Army, in basic training, that was the first time I started dealing with sleeping on the cold ground, and it sucks the warmth out of you. Like, if you're warm and you lay down, you're going to be freezing in no time.
Yeah.
You know, when you dig a hole, the ground just sucks the ground out of you. You got to put pine needles and stuff down. It's just miserable. Your feet are sweating, and then you go to sleep at night, and your feet are freezing. So that's kind of what they're dealing with. Because of all his actions, because of everything he's done, he actually gets promoted, and this is what I was talking about. They make him a second lieutenant, which is an officer. And for those of you that don't know, you either generally become an officer going to West Point or going through ROTC, going to college. Audie has a 5th grade education.
But he's such a badass.
But he's
undeniable.
Right, he's on the job training. But a 5th grade education, and he's able to be made an officer. So think about that.
That's
crazy. And a 5th grade education, he started 1st grade when he was 9 years old. So he wasn't exactly excelling in school regardless. But he's able to make second lieutenant at this point. And he has the ultimate respect and admiration of his higher-ups and the guys that are below him.
Yeah.
The Americans start pushing. We're pushing towards the Vosges Mountains. Moving through the mountains, there's frost on the ground. Every step is hard, like we've talked about. Another thing with the frost is when the sun does come up, the ground becomes muddy in the morning, because where it was frozen, it's constant rain. They're dealing with rain. They're dealing with this sleet. They're dealing with all this. There's snipers everywhere. They're going through areas where it's getting that thick, dark German woods, even though we're in France.
And they're in the enemy's backyard.
We're getting there. We're still in France, but we're in their backyard. So every tree could hide a sniper. Every open clearing could hide an artillery barrage that's about to hit you. Everything. So it's just going to be constantly gnawing on you. No friendly civilians, and they're constantly dealing with artillery barrages. Like I said, as the Germans fall back, if you fall back from an area, it means you were in that area. It means you have the grid coordinates. So if you just leave one spotter out there, okay, the Americans are in the field. So they're constantly dealing with this artillery, and artillery is terrifying. On October 25th, 1944, they're pushing through a forest, and then there's heavy shell fire. Guys are getting killed all around him. So just by some miracle, he's surviving still, right?
Yeah.
All these guys, new guys, experienced guys, older guys, are just, they're falling by the wayside. On October 26th, they're pushing through a forested area. Because he's the lieutenant, he has his radio operator with him, right? As they're moving, they're passing bodies of dead Americans. He remembers passing a body of a lieutenant who's frozen to the ground. His body's just covered with frost, right? He's becoming part of the landscape almost, As they start walking, his radio operator gets hit. Boom, fucking sniper shoots him right above the left eye. His radio officer goes down, he's killed. So Audie knows there's a sniper around. So Audie immediately runs to cover like he's supposed to, right? The German fires again, and the bullet glances and it ricochets, and it hits Audie through the hip. So now he's shot, and it ends up going in his hip and out his ass, his backside, basically. Audie yells out, I'll be damned, I've been shot right in the ass, they said.
Yeah.
But the bigger problem now is that there's a sniper out there, and Audie's alone, and now he's wounded, right?
And they know his position.
Exactly. So Audie's laying there. He picks up his carbine. He's on the ground. He's bleeding. He doesn't know how bad he's hurt. When he fell from getting shot, his helmet fell beside him. So the German made a mistake. The German turned a corner and shot Audie's helmet. And Audie was able to fire his rifle like a pistol with one hand, and he shot the sniper in the head, and he killed him.
So the sniper wounded him, saw that he went down, and then
Right.
went to go finish the job?
No,
on
he
foot?
came around, and from his vantage point, he saw Audie's helmet and thought it was still on Audie's head. So when he tried to fire at the helmet,
So he still had distance.
he still had distance.
Oh,
So
wow.
Audie was able to kill him with a single shot.
That's crazy.
After that, Audie tried to get up, and then he realized he couldn't because he was so bad. His legs wouldn't work, so he's laying there, and eventually his guys get him, and they put him on a stretcher, and they take him back to the rear. So he's shot through the hip. It traveled around, and it went out his backside. They put him in a hospital, but conditions are so bad, the roads are so bad that they can't advance these guys to the rear. So they're laying in this field hospital. He's just laying there
Outside?
on a cot. Yeah, well, he's in a little interior area, but basically exposed to the elements. So for 3 days, he's laying in this hospital, wait to go to the rear to get treatment. What happens when you lay for 3 days untreated? He's going to get gangrene.
Right.
So one of the eventually he's transferred to Aix-en-Provence with gangrene all through his hip and his backside and
Yikes.
everything like that.
That's when your skin's like turning black and stuff?
Yeah, your skin turns green. It smells putrid. It's literally rotting. Your
Yeah.
skin's rotting. So he started the war at 112 pounds. I don't know what he's at right now, but he ends up spending 2 months in a hospital just on penicillin and IVs, and they end up cutting 5 pounds of flesh away from his backside. 5 pounds from this little guy because his
Jeez.
skin was so rotten. After that, he's released from the hospital on December 29th, 1944, and he ends up pretty much walking with a limp through the rest of the war because this round that went through him that penetrated, and again, it skipped around his bone, so that's got to be god-awful painful. But he returns to his unit, and he returns to the fight. By the time he comes back on January 14th, 1945, his unit had broken through this mountainous area, which is a good thing. And this is where I was talking about. He comes back to his unit, and he immediately starts getting replacements and bringing them up. And that one replacement who told the story years later talked about how Audie shows up, basically looking like a child, but he has lieutenant bars. But all these young guys are scared. They don't know what's awaiting them. You know, if you're in a replacement depot and you're getting called up, that means people are getting killed or dying.
Yeah, ahead of you.
But Audie immediately comes to the depot, and he asks, this is where he said he wanted 18 Texans, and they gave him what they had. But Audie tells them, I'm going to take care of you, just listen. We're going to keep you alive. As long as you listen, we'll keep you alive. And he does. He does the best he can for these guys. So I think that's important to show, too. Despite not wanting to get to know everybody, he's still not taking that for granted, right?
Yeah.
He's still trying to give these guys a chance to survive, and they respected that, and they looked up to it. And we talk about command presence, you know. Despite his size and despite anything else, when this 5'5" little lieutenant comes in, you don't know that he's Audie Murphy. You don't know his combat experience, but he immediately commands their respect just by the way he acts and the way he carries himself,
Yeah.
you know. So that's going to go a long way.
That's crazy. So he's working up a legend for himself.
Yeah,
with
by
this
now
people.
he's very well known within his unit, and there's such a high turnover rate that a lot of the guys that are there have not been through a lot of. You know, you might have 50% of the guys that have been there more than 6 months, and the other guys have not. You know, so now they're in an area called the Colmar Pocket of France. This is one of the last German strongholds on French soil. So the 3rd Infantry Division, which is his division, their role is to advance near a city that's a fortified city, and there's a large forest in the northern section that they have to block. They have to knock the Germans out of this. So there's 2 fortified cities, and there's this forested area in between the area. The lieutenant colonel later explained this offensive as, or the area, the Colmar Pocket. Its possession was of cardinal importance, as the woods dominated the German stronghold of Holzwehr, the reduction of which was essential to the prompt accomplishment of the 3rd Division's offensive task. So their whole goal now is to knock the Germans out of this area. In the big scheme, it's just one more area that's been their whole thing. But this is
to them, it's everything.
Right, to them, it's everything. So on January 23rd, the 30th Regiment is going to push through the woods, and they're going to reach the outskirts. During this offensive, when they're pushing through, they encounter 10 German tanks and at least 100 enemy infantry. So we've talked about what happens when the infantry encounter tanks, and the results are disastrous. So the Americans start getting attacked by tanks, and again, 10 tanks and 100 infantry. That's important later. Audie's not in this action, but this units that's there, they're trying to dig in, but the ground's so hard because it's frozen they can't, and they end up just getting slaughtered. They are so under strength that they have to retreat from the area. So 10 German tanks and 100 German infantry in this area were able to slaughter the Americans and push them back. The next day, the 15th Regiment attempts to take the area. The fighting was so furious that they were basically decimated. Again, this is just almost every other guy's getting hit. Everybody guy's going down. We can't get through this area. With the exception of Lieutenant Murphy, All officers in this unit were killed. Okay.
Jeez.
102 of the company's 120 enlisted men were killed or wounded before they even reached their position. 102 of 120 enlisted men were killed, and all the officers were killed except Murphy and the 15th Regiment in this element that's trying to move forward and take
And
this
he
area.
was there?
Yeah, just to give you some idea of how horrendous this fighting was, right?
Yeah.
There's not a single man left in the company from North Africa that Audie shipped over with. In the first episode, you asked me, is he going to stay with these guys? Is going to be with them? So at this point in 1944, there's not a single member of the unit that Audie shipped over with. Everybody else is either killed, wounded, or rotated back to the rear.
Jesus. And he made it through it.
Luck and skill and audacity. By midnight on January 25th, Company B, which is Audie's unit, had penetrated into the woods and were in position. So now they're finally getting into this area. They push forward, they get pushed back. They push forward, they get pushed back. They end up sleeping in the woods that night and getting fresh supplies. Once they're supplied, they're going to try to move back forward. So they're advancing in the snowy darkness in the early morning, and they finally reach their position, okay? So they're finally, these guys are exhausted, they're miserable, they're scared, they're finally going to be digging in. Audie's able to dig a foxhole a little bit under the ground, even though it's so icy. The weather's so miserable, though, that he lays his head down on the ground. In the middle of the night, his hair actually freezes to the soil. Jeez. So in the middle of the night, they're woken with an artillery barrage, boom, and he picks his head up, and it rips the hair out of his head. So that's just kind of another idea of how miserable these conditions are. Laying on the ground that's cold enough where it freezes your moisture in your hair to the ground, right?
Wow.
I couldn't fall asleep that miserable, but they're so exhausted that they are able to, right? As soon as your head hits the ground and you're allowed to do so, they're going to be falling asleep. On January 25th, 1945, they're in this forested area, and the Germans start firing artillery. During the artillery barrage, Audie's wounded again. He gets shrapnel in both his legs, and the two lieutenants that he's speaking with are both killed in that attack. So out of the three guys, he's wounded and they're killed. After this, on January 26th, he's given command of B Company, which is the company that he's been serving with, and they're going to lead an attack into the town of Holtzwihr, which is one of those two
so they got the
fortified
forest now.
cities. Right, we have the forest, and we're trying to move, but they're moving through the woods. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're cold, they're scared, but they know that they have that objective in front of them. We have to take the town of Holtzwihr. We have to knock the Germans out of the Colmar pocket. We have to get through this area. Remember, we're 10 tanks and 100 infantrymen slaughtered our guys twice. But now we're in this area and we're trying to take it again. And now Audie's in charge, right? So there's this unexpected lull. They're like, hey, we're actually advancing. We're doing all right. So Audie immediately starts putting his guys in position. Hey, machine gunners over here, rifle guys over here. We don't have any tanks, but we have 2 tank destroyers, which are armored vehicles that have guns that are supposed to be big enough to kill the Germans.
Yeah.
So he starts setting them into position. They're waiting for the other companies to connect with them so they can move forward and make their advance. So he sets up his command post near a drainage ditch behind one of the tank destroyers. So I have my armored security a little bit over here. I got my guys up front in case anything happens, and then he's maintaining communication with battalion headquarters, which is to the rear. So if you can picture these guys, we're trying to set up our position. Behind us is company headquarters, and behind us is this one long road. If we lose this road, the Germans are going to be doing what we're trying to do. We're trying to push forward into Germany. If we lose this road, the Germans are going to have an open field back to our command post, which is often the case in these Medal of Honor actions, right? They're going to be able to get back into this area that's not well defended. So he's waiting to get orders to attack. He radios back, and he's like, hey, when are we going to be moving forward? And they tell him that the 2nd Battalion has not yet arrived, so your orders are to hold your position. Hold your position at all costs, okay? Wait here so we have enough guys to push forward, but hold your position. Wait for reinforcements. January 26, 1945. At approximately 2 p.m., he looks out in the field. He's looking through his binoculars, and he sees the worst thing you can possibly see. Tanks. 6 German tanks and 250 infantrymen. That's what they estimate. 6 German tanks and 250 infantrymen wearing white snow-covered. These are legit German infantry troops wearing their snow camouflage. Start moving forward. They start moving directly into the path of Audie's troops. We know we can't fight them. Remember, 10 tanks and 100 guys decimated 2 battalion attacks. So now these guys are coming. So Audie starts yelling, right? Audie's not afraid. I'm sure he is afraid, but Audie doesn't let panic overtake him. So his first action is starts yelling at his guys, get ready, here they come, get ready. So then he starts calling for artillery fire. And as soon as he gets on the radio, all hell opens loose, basically. The Germans open up. They start firing artillery from the town on the position. So all of the Americans that are out exposed start taking artillery fire. The German tanks are advancing towards them. The infantry are advancing forward towards them. We're outnumbered, we're outgunned, and they have armor. The German tactical objective again, they want to take this road and cut through Murphy's position and get to regimental headquarters. If they're successful, the enemy attack would threaten the 3rd Division's entire position. They're going to have this road access, right? So Murphy realizes he has to take this, or he has to hold this position at all costs. As the Germans come into the clearing, they start spreading out. As soon as they get into position, our tank destroyers, who are brave as well, start firing. Our armored vehicles start firing at their tanks, right? We're going to destroy these tanks. But of course, it doesn't happen that way. Our weapons are so ineffective, our guns are literally bouncing off. Our rounds are hitting the steel and bouncing off. So you can imagine seeing
how fearful you would be at that point.
If you were especially a replacement, you're laying in the dirt, you're looking around, you're panicking, you're waiting for the Germans to get into range for you to fire your rifle. You're seeing our only armor we have is firing those 90 millimeter shells, and they're just bouncing off the Germans. They're getting direct hits, and they're just proving ineffective. So the Germans start advancing and firing viciously. The Germans' tanks are firing, and they take out our machine gun positions immediately, right? So now we're being decimated. The 2 tank destroyers start to fall back while they're trying to fight. One of them takes a direct hit, and it explodes, right? It's on fire. The Americans that are inside are killed, and the other ones get out and run to the rear. The other tank destroyer tries to move into position, and it falls into a drainage ditch, so it's gunned straight up. So now all we have is overwhelmed, scared Americans versus these crack infantry troops, these enemy troops that are coming. So Audie starts calling for fire. He starts calling for artillery fire, but he's looking around, and he knows that if his guys stay here, they're going to die. There's nothing they can do. They can fight as hard as they want, and they can be as brave as they want, but they're going to die. So he yells at them, and he says, everybody get out of here. Get the hell out of here, and that's an order. He tells everybody, save yourselves, his whole company, you leave, I'm staying, right? So Audie is now alone. 19-year-old kid.
He decides to stay?
He decides to stay because he's got a radio and he knows how to use artillery. So he's a 19-year-old kid. He's facing 6 German tanks, 250 infantry estimated are advancing, and the only thing standing between them and the 3rd Infantry Division is Audie Murphy. A kid that was so small that he was rejected from the Marine Corps, rejected from the Air Corps, rejected from everybody that he tried to join, but now he's standing the line by himself.
Does anybody stay with him?
There's some people that tried, and he's quoted as saying, get the hell out of here, and that's an order. So he orders them to go back. So now he's 200 yards from the enemy by himself, 2 football fields, but he's got his radio. And this is, again, just Audie. He can't see making other people die for a job he can do himself.
Yeah.
He can do it. He doesn't need 50 people standing there protecting him when he's on his
he just doesn't
radio.
know how to retreat.
He doesn't have any retreat in him. So he starts calling for fire. So as they're falling back, as these guys are running for their life, Audie is alone at his post. He's firing his carbine. Anytime he gets a German within position, he's firing, and he's trying to kill the Germans with his rifle while he's calling artillery fire, which is going to be the big killer, right? So he starts firing effective fire on the Germans. He starts firing his artillery fire, laying down a wall of protection so his guys can retreat. He's laying down this physical cover that we don't have, so they're able to escape. While he's doing this, he's cold, he's miserable, he's scared, and he's still suffering from that leg wound that he's limping around from, where he has 5 pounds of flesh removed from his ass, right?
Jesus.
The Germans start advancing so close, Audie starts calling artillery literally on his own position, right? The artillery spotters who actually wrote some of the citations for his Medal of Honor, some of the guys that testified to it, they said, how close are you to the position? And his response over the radio was, hold on to the phone and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards. Meaning, I know they're close, just fucking give me my fire, give me what I want. Because of his actions, these other guys are able to survive. Because of his courage and audacity, he's able to hold the Germans at bay. He fires his rifle until he's out of ammunition, then he decides he's got to fall back, right? Only common sense is going to tell him, you can't keep this up for long. So he starts to run back to the enemy lines. He doesn't know how he's going to stop these Germans, but he's got to do something. So as he's moving back, he sees that tank destroyer that's on fire. That tank destroyer that's filled with gasoline and filled with ammunition, and it's literally on fire, but it's got a working gun on top of it. It's got a .50 caliber. So Audie Murphy, according to a witness citation, a private who later wrote a citation said, I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer while bursts of machine gun pistol fire from the advancing infantry battalion battered against the hull and tread. So Audie grabs his radio and he jumps up on top of this burning vehicle. The Germans are shooting it. There's witnesses that are seeing these rounds picking off, but Audie gets up onto the .50 cal and he realizes the gun is working. A lieutenant later said, he was completely exposed and silhouetted against the backdrop of bare trees and snow, with fire under him that threatened to blow the destroyer to bits if it reached the gasoline and ammunition. The eyewitness later said, he killed them in the draws, in the meadow, in the woods, wherever he saw them. So Audie knows that these tanks won't advance without the infantry. So he volunteers to give his life essentially by climbing onto this tank, and he just starts mowing them down with that 50 caliber. He's laying directly into these infantry guys. So these 250 infantrymen are now becoming 240 and 230 because Audie's firing them at them with the machine gun. And the tanks,
And the 50 cal is just shredding
50 cal is just shredding them. We were talking about Rambo earlier. So he's putting down effective fire. Meanwhile, he's at risk of this tank destroyer exploding at any minute, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's, get off that damn thing. You're going to die. But he doesn't care. He's standing up there and he's just firing. And the tanks don't know where the fire's coming from because they can't believe anybody would be on this thing because all they're seeing is an exploded tank. So the Germans are trying to call forward. They don't see any Americans, and all they're doing is taking this effective fire. The Germans finally figure out where it is, and they start trying to advance or redirect their fire towards the tank destroyer. He's taking direct hits while he's on this tank destroyer. While he's up there, he's getting hit. The tank's getting hit. The tank destroyer's getting hit. His map is riddled with bullets and shell fragments. He's getting knocked down. He's calling for fire on the radio in between. So he's still calling for this fire. He's putting it down. While he's up there, the tank destroyer took 2 direct hits from the 88s, from these big German guns. 2 direct hits. He'd fall down, he'd get knocked down, and he'd get back up on the gun, and he'd start firing. Again, periodically, he'd use the phone to adjust fire. The headquarters guys that wrote recommended him from the Medal of Honor, they're hearing him on the radio, and they're hearing the rounds. And when he's keying up the radio, they're hearing the rounds pinging off the steel. They're hearing, his gun shattering. They're hearing all these things. At one point, there's a lull, and they get back on the radio, and they say, "Are you still alive?" And he responded, "I think so." And then he just kept firing. The Germans... tanks were giving a wide berth to this thing, right? So because of this, he's able to do that. They probably couldn't hear him. They probably couldn't see him. And Audie's just standing alone. You got to imagine he's just doesn't care if he dies at this point. So the Germans end up realizing where he's at. And when they start using the smoke to cover, they start to try to flank his position. There's a squad that tries to move. And Audie can't see well either because the thing's on fire. So there's smoke going around. So at one point, the wind takes the smoke and he looks and there's a squad of Germans 30 yards away from him that have crept up to him. So Audie mows him down with his 50 cal and then he just rakes their bodies for good measure. He says he goes back and forth because he's got ammo up there. He's got the ammo cans and he's got everything else. When he finally realizes the Germans are getting too close again, he gets on that radio and he calls for fire directly on top of his own position. Basically, I don't care if I die, just kill these Germans so you guys can get out of there. They tell him, we're not going to, it's on your own, that's your own position, sir. And he says, I don't give a damn, give me my fire. So they start calling out fire. And amazingly, his luck holds out and he's able to single-handedly hold off this German attack, single-handedly until the Air Corps is able to come.
So they were saying, you're going to die, we're not going to do it. And
right.
he said, fucking do it.
I don't give a damn. Give me that fire. So single-handedly, he stood up initially on the ground and then falling back to this burning tank destroyer that it could be destroyed at any minute. After the Germans fell back, he slid off the tank. They didn't even have enough strength to jump off the tank or to run. He's out of ammunition in his carbine. But he falls back to his own strong point, and then he organizes a counterattack. He gets some more ammo, and he says, let's go. So he continued to call for artillery fire. Once the Germans are a lull, he goes back and he gets his own guys. If he hadn't have done this, again, the Germans would have pushed through. If a battalion of Americans was there, like they had been twice before, they would have been decimated. But single-handedly, Audie Murphy held the line for an hour. He held the line by himself against an armored infantry attack for 1 hour. The map he was holding that he was using to call for fire was covered. It was ripped apart by shrapnel holes. His leg was throbbing. His plants were bleeding because his old wound reopened. So he's pumping blood, we always talk about. His legs just aching. His raincoat that he was wearing was filled with shrapnel from all these shells from everything that was going off. His trousers are soaked with blood. He had to slide off the tank and hobble to the rear, like he said. He said his legs started shaking and he had an adrenaline dump. So he leaned against the tree and he was too exhausted to even care if the Germans shot him. As he was walking back, he couldn't even run. He said, if they shoot me in the back, let them. At least I'll be done. After he reached safety and he got to the wood line, the tank destroyer he was on exploded. The fire finally reached the gasoline and then it exploded. But like I said, he wasn't done. He led a counterattack. He helped organize this counterattack, and he was able to push back on the Germans and finish them off.
Damn. Now, at this point, his whole crew is like,
yeah,
he's got to be a freaking legend now.
Right. One of the eyewitnesses said, he saved our lives. If he hadn't done what he'd done, the Germans would have annihilated us. And another one in his official recommendation said, it was the bravest thing I've ever seen a man do in combat. So these guys are just in awe of him.
Yeah.
And I don't think he intended, initially, when he told everybody to fall back, I think he figured, I'll stay here and die if I have to. You guys get out of here. I'll hold him as long as I can. Until he saw the
He was
tank
just
destroyer and he realized, hey, I got something else I can fight with, right?
We have a chance.
We have a chance.
At least I have a chance to kill some more.
Exactly. Let me get any German I kill is not coming after you. So let me hold my ground and let me try.
He probably just made peace. Like, I'm not going to live, so I'll take out as many as I can.
He kept talking about this weary indifference that he had, and you can see it here. It's just, okay, my life's been over. I should have died a long time ago. So let me just do what I can. For this action, there's no question, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. You have the artillery guys saying, we told him several times, and he's calling for fire. They can hear the enemy on the phone, on the radio. His own guys that are falling back, you can imagine an experienced guy knowing the risk. You can imagine somebody who tried to take that area days before and was decimated by less of a German unit, more tanks but less infantry, knowing how hard that was. And you can imagine the new guys thinking, oh my God, look at this hero. So he was recommended and received the Medal of Honor, of course. And his citation, Second Lieutenant Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry. Murphy ordered his men to withdraw to prepared positions in the woods, while he remained forward of his command post and continued to give fire directions to artillery by telephone. Behind him, to his right, one of our tank destroyers received a direct hit and began to burn. Its crew withdrew to the woods. Murphy continued to direct artillery fire, which killed a large number of advancing enemy infantry. With the enemy tanks completely abreast of his position, Murphy climbed on top of the burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its 50 caliber machine gun against the enemy. He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. The enemy tanks, losing infantry support, began to fall back. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate 2nd Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position and wiped out a squad which was trying to creep up unnoticed on his flank. Germans reached as close as 10 yards, only to be mowed down by his fire. He received a leg wound, but ignored it and continued to the single-handed fight until his ammunition was exhausted. He then made his way to the company, refused medical attention, and organized the company in a counterattack, which forced the Germans to withdraw. His directing of artillery fire wiped out many of the enemy. He killed or wounded about 50.
Jeez.
2nd Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction and enabled it to hold the woods, which had been the enemy's objective.
Damn, dude.
Single-handed fighting for an hour, right? German tanks advancing on him. Again, they're trying every available weapon, not to destroy or dislodge the Americans, but to destroy or dislodge 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy.
Yeah.
Every weapon available, which is tanks, which is,
everybody else is gone. So
everybody
it's like
else is
we got one
gone.
fixed position.
Right. And what he later said about this, again, rather than, like we talked about earlier when he got his first kills, he's never this bravado, he's never this, I'm so badass. His statement on this was, except for a vague pain in my leg, I feel nothing. No sense of triumph, no exhilaration at being alive. Even the weariness seems to have passed. Existence has taken on the quality of a dream in which I am detached from all that is present. So he's just, he's just operating at this point. This is just what he is. But the war moves on, right? So he doesn't receive his medal till later, obviously. But after they end up having that successful attack, they end up spending the rest of the afternoon holding their position, just frozen and exhausted in this ground. That night, they laid among their dead comrades. So there's American bodies littering the ground. There's German bodies littering the ground. But they end up just, digging holes and sleeping where they're at. There was so many bodies in the area. One of the officers later, there's a canal that runs through the area. He says, after that bloody day was over, we went down to the canal to get a drink. The bodies were so thick, you had to push them aside to get a drink of water. So that's how horrendous this was. So you can,
Jesus.
19 years old, mind you, right? You can imagine, not even if you hadn't taken part in this action, just think about what these guys are experiencing. Think about the cold, think about the misery, think about the hunger, and now there's just bodies everywhere.
Death everywhere you look.
Yeah, it's insane to think that
on
you
both
could,
sides of the line.
right? How would you even process that and think that any way you're going to be able to survive this when all these other guys? But they just have to
I
keep
survived
moving
this
forward.
battle. Great. Now
exactly.
I got to go to the next
what's
one.
next? What's next? Because this was the third offensive.
And you got to think that every time you go into a battle, your chances are gone. You know, that superstition shit
Right.
starts happening where you're
Yeah.
like, I've made it through 3, nobody else has.
Right.
I'm
The law
that-
of averages. It's
Right.
gotta end up at some time.
Flip a coin.
My
you know
luck's,
what I mean?
my luck's gonna run out at some point, and that's
Yeah.
what these guys are dealing with. Audie's been wounded, I think, 3 times now, but
Yeah.
but that's, you know, you're watching guys get their legs blown off. You're watching guys get their heads blown off. You're watching guys disappear into nothingness, getting hit by artillery.
Guys
You're
that
seeing
you,
guys get
guy
shot.
that you may have slept next to the night
Right.
before.
You're seeing guys with horrendous wounds. You're seeing guys with minor wounds that are bleeding out, and you're not understanding why they're died. You're seeing guys dying from concussion, you know, where they don't
Yeah.
have a mark on them, like we talked about when he landed in Sicily. You
Yeah.
know, so it's just this is the kind of stuff they're dealing with, and they still have a war to fight. They still have to push on. you know.
Yeah.
So the next day, his unit takes the town of Holzwehr, the city, which was the objective, and they start moving forward again.
When they take a town, what do they do?
Well, you have to physically get all the enemy out of there, but then you're going to move your headquarters and your troops and everybody in there, and you're going to basically take up position in there, and you can use that until you advance to the next one.
And the enemy's not coming in behind?
Well, the Germans are notorious for counterattacks. Germans never leave a position without counterattacking. But
Yeah.
usually they'll call artillery fire back on their old positions because they knew where they were.
Yeah.
But when we take the town, we've pushed past that, so we're going to push forward.
Now, are they
ahead
going
into-
through the houses and stuff and
Oh,
getting
yeah.
blankets and jackets and
Yeah,
all
you're
that
doing
shit?
anything you can, any food you
Food.
can find, anything. And then
Money.
again, that's what the civilians are going to be there, and they're terrified. And you know, from their perspective, we're taking their last remnants of food, but we have to. You know, these soldiers are starving.
What
these
about like
soldiers are
their
miserable.
heirlooms and money and shit like that?
There's going to be a lot of people with sticky fingers, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So right, and a lot of people are going to be looking at the German civilians. Again, we're still in France at this point, but when you're getting into Germany, you know, you guys caused this. You could have stopped this. We
Kiss
don't have
my
any
ass.
sympathy for you. Kiss
Yeah.
my ass. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they're going to be doing that kind of stuff. So
Again,
that's where this
because you're seeing
animosity is
your
going to be
buddies
going.
get their heads blown off, and
Right.
you're relating that to them, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
So after they take the town, they're just going to be advancing forward again. Now they're facing scattered resistance as the Germans are falling back. They're starting to take a lot more POWs. A lot of these Germans are surrendering. Very little sleep, just miserable, like we always talk about. It's almost like you're drunk. You're in this haze, as Audie keeps mentioning. One night they were preparing to take a bridge. The Germans called in artillery fire, and 8 of his men were killed. You know,
Damn.
so just imagine, you know, month after month after month of just guys being killed out all around you. After 7 weeks, the division was pulled off the front lines finally, and they get a rest. During that time, the division had 4,500 casualties, which is just, you know,
How
again,
many?
4,500.
On our side?
Yeah, and is in the 3rd Infantry Division. Wow. Audie ends up being promoted to 1st Lieutenant, and then he's awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star for those actions that we mentioned previously. He's going to get to visit Paris again, which he doesn't like, he doesn't enjoy. And then because they start hearing these rumors that, hey, you're going to get the Medal of Honor, they try to take him out of combat. So he ends up being pulled to the line. They make him a regimental liaison officer to keep him from getting killed because it's a PR disaster if a Medal of Honor recipient gets killed. So they're trying to keep him off the line. So he does that. He has a driver. He hates it. You know, he's in the rear. He wants to be up front in the fight. In one incident, he heard that the company that he was in, B Company, that he had been taken off the line. He heard 2 of their officers were killed, and the company was pinned down near the Siegfried line. So for 2 days, these guys are pinned down, and Audie was just back at headquarters pacing around, brooding over it, basically. So finally, he takes his Jeep, and he drives on out there to go help these guys because he knows they need help. So when he finds his men, they're dug in, and they're exhausted. There's no enemy around, but they're too scared to go forward, and they don't know what to do. They don't have effective leadership. So Audie gets on foot, and he just walks them out of this area, basically. He shows them, you know, let's take this route, and he doesn't save them because they don't need saving, but he's showing with his will and an initiative, you know, hey, come on, follow me, and they do. And there's no shots fired. They're able to get out of their area, but this is, again, just he can't be in the rear and be static. He has to be moving forward. They push forward again as the 3rd Infantry Division is advancing into Germany. The Germans are crumbling. They're starting to surrender, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize. You know, you think of the German soldier, these badass soldiers. By the end of the war, when we're taking these towns, you're not fighting these badass soldiers. You're fighting old men and kids, right?
Yeah.
They're forcing kids into uniform. My grandpa was in Czechoslovakia at the closing days of the war, and the Germans that were surrendering to him were 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 70-year-olds, because all their
So it's getting
soldiers,
easier.
all their soldiers are dead. Right. Well, it's not that it's getting easier. It's just it's more desperate on both sides.
Yeah.
But all the German army's been fighting since 1939, September 1st, 1939. So their core is gone.
Yeah.
So they're shoving anybody in a uniform that wasn't able to get into a uniform before. They're going to push through Nuremberg and then Salzburg. Eventually, Audie Murphin's given leave back to France, and while he's there, he's in a hotel. They get news that the war has finally ended. The war is over. So
How does that happen?
how does the war end? The Germans surrender.
Okay,
So
they actually did it.
Hitler's killed himself at this point. The Germans are retreating. The Soviets take Berlin. There's no effective resistance anymore that they can wage. So the Germans are going to come to the peace table. The German leadership that's left is going to try to salvage something and save themselves a little bit. That's why the Germans, there was an assassination attempt on Hitler prior to, because even the German officers, they knew for a long, long time that this war is unwinnable.
And he wasn't
but
having
there's
it?
this fanatical, desire to keep going. So eventually they're able to come to the table. May 8th, 1945 is when the war is going to.
And then how does Germany maintain Germany?
That's where the peace talks are going. In a sense, they didn't. That's why we had East Berlin and West Berlin, and we divided the country
Okay.
up. So the British, the Americans, and the Soviets are going to divide the country. We're going to come to the peace table. We're going to talk. We're going to have all of the post-war things, and then we had the Marshall Plan, where Europe is destroyed. Right? It's not like, we had a bad day. It's literally all their infrastructure is blown up. All their buildings are blown up. All their roads and bridges are blowing up, right? So we had the Marshall Plan, where we pumped a lot of money back into Germany to rebuild their infrastructure, rebuild their society and everything. And part of that was to fight the Cold War, to keep the Germans on our side rather than the Soviet side.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's the countryside's devastated. The people are miserable. The Germans are starving. The American, the troops that are there are starving. There's hatred and animosity between the public that's there. Yeah, it's a fascinating time.
Imagine?
And it's crazy.
That would be like such a painful time, like or such a stressful situation to have to deal with.
Well, we don't.
You go from killing each other to peace talks.
Right, which we did well, actually.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, obviously there was some incidents, and then there was,
Are there masters of that? Like, do they call certain people in to maintain
Sure.
that?
Yeah, we have people moving behind the lines doing everything. An army isn't just infantry guys.
Yeah.
We had guys, reporters that are documenting the war and authors and things, but you have guys that are going to be running in, and we assigned
negotiators.
military governors into certain areas that are trying to get them back on track and try to rebuild the infrastructure. And then that's part of the problem too, is they were kicking out anybody who had ever been associated with the Nazi Party, but most of the people that can run an administration were associated with the Nazi Party. So, but that's, a whole nother story.
Shit show.
But you can imagine the German civilians, though, wandering the streets, starving. They've all lost family members as soldiers, and they've all lost family members as civilians, because we're bombing them from the sky. We're blowing up buildings. People are getting killed. That's just, it is what it is. And this is what all of Audie and all these other soldiers are seeing too. This is what you're passing. This is what your collaborators that collaborated with the Nazis are being hung in the streets, and other people are coming out, and there's this threat, this fear of this guerrilla war that might take place after, that the SS are going to lead, that didn't really come to fruition, but that was kind of the fear. So everybody's on guard. And then you do have the people, I've had my buddies killed for years. I'm supposed to be nice to these people now. So and you're trying to round up all these high-ranking Nazi
Well, you
party
put it on
members.
the other side. Germany takes over and we retreat.
Yeah,
And
that
they
would
go,
have been.
we're going to help you.
Oh, trust me, I'm not defending them. Yeah, I'm just saying
You know what
the reality
No, I know.
of the
I'm just saying how
situation.
awkward of a situation that is for both sides.
Exactly. So, but by the end of the war, again, May 8th, 1945, when the war ends, Audie, he doesn't feel relief. He just feels that numbness, which is going to follow him for the rest of the life. But on June 2nd, 1945, he's awarded the Medal of Honor by Alexander Patch, and along with the Legion of Merit. As we talked about before, he's estimated throughout the total of the war, he spent 20 months in combat. He is estimated to have killed 235 or to 240 Germans and Italians during the war. He was awarded 37 medals and decorations, to include the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, a Bronze Star with V ×2, 3 Purple Hearts, Presidential Unit Citation, and then later Outstanding Civilian Service. He got a Good Conduct, American Campaign, a European Theater Medal with an arrowhead for an invasion, and 9 campaigns, which is insane. Most guys have 1 or 2. 9 campaigns. Victory Medal, Occupation Medal, later got a Reserve Medal, the Combat Infantryman's Badge, multiple marksmanship badges, the French Legion of Honor, the French Croix de Gras with the Silver Star, the French Croix de Gras with a Palm, the Medal of a Liberated France, Belgian Croix de Gras with Palm, French Forget, and then various other, local and state and things like that.
Just a
every
freaking
valor,
rack.
every valor medal you can have, Audie earned.
What does his uniform look like?
Oh, I'll post pictures up
it
there,
insane?
but it's just well with the ribbons, it's just the large stack. But whenever you see him with his shadow box and things, it looks just like a uniform, display of, hey, here's every medal that we have in the store, because he has every medal for valor you can have.
Yeah.
The only thing he doesn't have is Pacific Campaign medals, because he was busy fighting in Europe the whole time.
Yeah.
But Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, multiple silver stars, multiple bronze stars in the CIB. There's nothing else you can do. And as we've been talking, again, I'm glossing over these so fast, but we could do whole episodes on each of these individual actions. It's just one after another after another. And the more veterans you interview, the more you talk to that served with them, they'll tell you other stories that you're never hearing.
So there's no bullshit with this guy. I mean, there's just...
He's not the one telling his stories. Again, his book, To Hell and Back, which is an amazing book. If you read through that, you would be like, oh, what did he do? He glosses over his Medal of Honor. He glosses over his DSC. It doesn't seem that big. If you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't even know what they were. It's humble in that sense, And
is that kind of a bummer with the book?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book's, like I said, very dialogue heavy, and the way it was written is a little different than people think. Because, like I said, his ghost author, Beck McClure, did a lot of the writing on it. But, you're not going to get what you want out of it in that sense, because it's more about the experience of the soldier and the weariness and the battle and things.
That's crazy, man.
I think we can get to keep going on this.
What's that?
The after the war.
You want to keep going with it?
I think so.
Cool.
We can wrap it up. 19, 20 years old. In all this time that he served, now, just like every other veteran, it's going to be time to go back home.
He's
right?
20 at this point?
I believe he's 20. He was born in 1925, and it's 1945.
Wow,
so.
man.
Yeah, so on June 10th, he's going to go back home, and he comes back to a hero's welcome. So he gets to San Antonio, and people are already recognizing him as soon as he gets off the plane. There's parades and dinners, but he's really uncomfortable. So he's going back to small town Texas, and all these little towns that he's lived in are trying to claim him, right? We're the home of Audie Murphy. But remember, when he was in these homes, he was living in a boxcar, or he was living in all these places. So he was kind of miserable in that, but he was appreciative of the support he was getting, even though it was uncomfortable to him, right? Because he's just like all these heroes. Like we've talked about it before. When somebody gets a Medal of Honor, that's usually the worst day of their life.
Yeah.
That means a lot of people have died and things went very wrong. So he's being celebrated for this. But it's something that you're having to relive. And this is something that all these veterans are dealing with. On the one hand, you're going to be thankful and you're going to be happy and you're going to be excited, but you're also having to relive these memories and try to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life.
And it's memories of your friends.
Right. So he's going to be...
that you served with that died.
Yeah, he's getting this instant celebrity status. One of the big things, though, is everybody pulled in together, all the community people, and they gave him war bonds, and they presented him all this money, so he was able to buy a house in Farmersville. And with that house, he gave it to his sister, Corinne, with the promise that his little brothers that were still in that orphanage could come live there, right?
Yeah.
So immediately he's given enough money for a house, and his first thought is his little brothers and his sisters who are in that orphanage.
Yeah.
And again, we're making this hero out of this guy, but his life, his experience was so miserable that 3 of his brothers and sisters were in an orphanage. So he makes good on his promise, and he moves them in with his sister Corinne, and he's end up living there too with Corinne, her husband, her family, and then the rest of his family. Immediately when he comes back from the war, Audie starts struggling with PTSD. He starts struggling with nightmares. He starts struggling with a lot of these things. And that's one of the big things about Audie is a lot of people think, oh, he had this great life. He became an actor and everything was well. As soon as he came home from the war, one morning, Corinne went in his room to wake him up for the morning, and the lights were on, and she realized that he hadn't even been asleep yet, and he told her, I was up all night fighting the war all night long again. So every time he closed his eyes, he'd start to see this. So he started sleeping with the lights on in the house because he didn't want to fall asleep, because when he fell asleep, he had nightmares. He was jumpy. He would wake up screaming all the time. He's having these issues. One time his sister was feeding him some black-eyed peas and he couldn't eat them, and she said, what's wrong? And he said, they remind me of the brains of a German I shot in the head, basically, right? So he's seeing this kind of stuff everywhere. He's trying to plan his future and figure out what he's going to do, but he doesn't have any plans because he doesn't have any skills, so he's just an infantryman. But on July 21st, 1945, Life magazine put his face big on the cover of the magazine, and he became a national celebrity more than just the local Texas celebrity.
Yeah.
James Cagney, you know who that is? The actor, saw him and realized, hey, he'd do good in the movies. Let's kind of get him out here. So James Cagney sent a telegram for Audie, come to Hollywood, see what it's about. So Audie came to Hollywood the day before he got discharged from the Army. He's still wearing his uniform, Cagney met him at the airport expecting to see this heroic figure in a uniform, and he said Audie just looked like this tired little kid. You know, he's got all his medals on him and everything, but he's exhausted, he's miserable, his skin is poor. So he tries to kind of help him get back into health. Audie's getting book offers. Cagney, again, just super stand-up guy, ends up sending him a contract. He's got his own movie studio, so he figures, I'm going to help Audie Murphy out. This hero shouldn't be struggling, so he ends up giving him a movie contract, and he moves him into his house. His first job is basically to get healthy. That's what Cagney says. So go ride horses, go fishing, go do whatever you want. After that, he starts taking...
What a cool dude, man.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome that Cagney did that because he didn't have to, and he didn't do it for celebrity or, you know, publicity or anything. He literally let him live in the back house of his estate. You know, just get healthy. You're a hero and you deserve better. He puts Audie through acting classes, and Audie Murphy meets and falls in love with an actress. He starts a romance, and then she ended up leaving him for Howard Hughes. You know who that is?
Yeah.
So it's a funny little story. Audie Murphy threatened that if he ever saw Howard Hughes, he was basically going to kick his ass, and people had to keep him away from Howard Hughes for the rest of his life.
No way.
That's one of the funny things about Audie is he's got his rage.
What was the Howard Hughes thing?
The Spruce Goose. Well, there's the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Aviator.
Okay,
yeah. That Howard Hughes. Yeah,
okay.
Audie wanted to kill him, and he basically, if he ever saw him, he was going to attack him, basically. So people for the rest of his life would have to keep him all over him because he resented Howard Hughes as a rich, privileged person who just came in and stole his girl while he's struggling. He starts dating another actress named Wanda Hendricks, who he ends up marrying. But again, during this time, he has to start taking sleeping pills because his nightmares are so bad he can't fall asleep. In December 1946, there's an article in the paper. Don't know how much of it is Hollywood or how much is true, but he picked up a hitchhiker on the side of the road, and the hitchhiker tried to rob him of his gun. The hitchhiker shoved his gun into his waist, and Audie Murphy drives him to the gas station like he says to, and then the hitchhiker allegedly slapped him in the face and told him he had a gun. So Audie Murphy pulled into a gas station, and when the guy was distracted, Audie Murphy slugged him, and they started fighting. So allegedly he fought for 10 minutes, and he was able to subdue this guy and turn him over to the police. The newspaper article said, the Army's most decorated soldier climbed all over the 6'2" frame of a husky 190-pound would-be robber yesterday and battered him into unconsciousness. And at the time, they listed Audie as 5'7", 130, so he may have been a little bigger than because he was still growing.
Yeah.
He ends up starting to get movie roles as an extra. He stars in an Alan Ladd movie as a West Pointer, which is funny because he never went to West Point, even though he was an officer. And then he meets a guy named Spec McClure, who I've mentioned several times, who becomes a lifelong friend. Spec McClure was an author. He's a publicist, but he's also an Army veteran. So he respects Audie, and they respect each other. Audie's contract with Cagney ends, so he has to move on. And this is where we talked about before. He has nowhere to go. He has nothing to do. So he ends up sleeping in a gym. This gentleman by the name of Terry Hunt owns a gym, and he pretty much lets any veteran sleep there if they need a place to go.
Cool.
So Audie was sleeping in the back room of a gym on a cot until Terry Hunt ended up moving him into his house and trying to take care of him. So fortunately, he has a lot of people that are trying to take care of him.
A lot of patriotic people around.
Right. But despite everything he did in the war, he's back to being kind of a guy with no skills, you know, a guy that's just now suffering from all these things. He's only been on this planet for 20 years, and 2 of them have been the most horrendous hell that you can go through. So he struggles because of that.
More than 2 years. His childhood was a shit show, too.
That's actually a good point that I wasn't thinking of. He's in the Hollywood circles, though. He starts, you know, getting his acting career going. And again, I just like the little stories about him. There's another story that he was at a Hollywood party. There was an actor by the name of Lawrence Tierney who was known for going around and fighting people and causing problems and just picking fight with people. So apparently he's at this party running his mouth, trying to pick fights, and Audie Murphy, who's half his size, walks up to him and tells him, that's enough. And then the guy's starting to run his mouth, and everybody said he just got this glare over him, and he said, that's enough. And then the guy, it was the first time Lawrence Tierney's known to have backed down from anybody. He ended up leaving the party, and Audie later said, I would have happily killed him if he would have tried anything. And one of the reporters who wrote about it in one of the Hollywood, rags said, such deadly menace I never saw in anybody's eyes, because you could still just see this in Audie. This guy literally stood up to 6 tanks and 250 guys. If you fuck with him, you're going to deal with it. And you can see that flash over it, so I thought it was cool.
That's awesome.
He started to get more roles in Hollywood, and then him and Spec McClure decide they came home from the war, and they're seeing you know, you hear the talk of misery and victory gardens and stuff, but he said everybody had just moved on with their lives and all his friends are dead and all these guys. So they decided they wanted to write this definitive account. And this is to hell and back. They wanted to write a definitive account of what the average infantryman suffered, a definitive account of how bad it really was and what these guys did over there so that everybody could be happy. So that was what To Hell and Back was supposed to be. Unfortunately, when they would get together and write, apparently Audie would lay on the couch and Spec McClure would ask him questions and try to write, you know. And again, most people, when you read To Hell and Back, it's like, oh, that's Audie Murphy's account. That's an autobiography. But according to Spec McClure and others, he'd ask Audie something, and Audie would start to talk, and then he would just roll over, and he didn't want to talk about it, you know, or he couldn't deal with what he was reciting. So Spec kind of filled in some of the details, and Spec would kind of, you know, flower it up with the dialogue and everything. But that was part of what To Hell and Back is. It's part fact, and it's part Spec McClure filling in those details.
Yeah.
While they were writing the book, Audie was sent to France to receive medals from the French government, and he took Spec McClure with him, and they toured the battlefields. According to Spec, though, they would be driving down a road, and Audie would just point, and he'd be like, that was it. That's where I earned my distinguished. His memory was so sharp, and his skills were so sharp, and where he found his Medal of Honor action, he started leading him through a path, and he was able to go find the actual American tank destroyer that he was on, because his memory was so sharp, and his skills were so sharp, which kind of shows you how he was able to do all these things.
It was still there in the field?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My dad was in Germany in the 60s, and he said there were still bunkers and littered, you know, just remnants of the war for a long time. He ended up marrying Wanda Hendricks, an actress, in 1949, and then he started doing Western movies. He got successful at kind of like B movies, you know, the cheaper roles, but he got to show off his shooting skills, which was good.
He's making a living.
He's making a living, which is a good way to put it. When To Hell and Back was released, it was a huge success, though. So you're a Hollywood actor. You just reached this book. So his studio starts pressuring him to make the movie To Hell and Back, which initially he wanted to do, but later he decided that he was going to do it. During this time, he was famous as being the most decorated veteran of the war, but he's also famous as an actor. He went on the show This Is Your Life. You know what that is. And Laddie Tipton's daughter was brought out, the one that when he earned his Distinguished Service Cross. So he actually gave her his Distinguished Service Cross.
Oh, cool.
And he claims he gave away all his medals, which may or may not be true that they existed. On the surface, it looked like he had a good life, but behind the scenes, he was addicted to gambling. He was drinking, and he and his wife divorced in 1950. He had a large gun collection. His wife later claimed that he would just shoot clocks off the walls in the house, and he would just shoot things and go around. At one point, he put the gun in his mouth and said he was going to kill himself. Another point, he called his buddy Terry Hunt and told him, I'm going to kill myself right now. You know, I'm saying goodbye. And quick thinking, his friend said, well, that's just great. Why don't you go ahead and do it? And Audie said, what? And he said, yeah, let every kid that looks up to you in America wake up tomorrow and see their hero killed himself. So Audie said, God damn you, and hung up. But he's dealing with these things. He's dealing with this depression. He's dealing with all this stuff, you know.
Stuff that they didn't even understand.
Exactly. And that's one of the things Audie Murphy's famous for. He's one of the first people to bring this out, to bring publicity to PTSD and what this kind of stuff was and what these guys are dealing with. He ended up marrying again after he divorced his first wife. He had 2 children. He joined the Texas National Guard, but he was always struggling. He always slept with a gun under his pillow. Anyone that lived with him, you know, knew lights are going to be on. He's going to have nightmares. He's going to have screaming fits. Like we talked about, he had a gambling addiction, right? When you've gone through so much at so young of an age, it's hard for anything to excite you. So he was just constantly, he'd bet thousands of dollars on in nothing, and he would lose, and he didn't care, and he would just move on to the next one. Constant nightmares. Just, we talked about how miserable it was during the war, but this was his life after the war too. Was just kind of never having a night of sleep. One of his friends shared a hotel room with him one time, and he said he woke up to Audie just punching his fist into the wall so hard that they were bleeding. Audie was just hitting the wall, and Audie was still asleep. So he woke him up the next day, and Audie just told him, "Oh, I had a bad dream." So he said he never shared a hotel room with Audie again.
Damn.
There was another time, one of the actresses that he worked with basically said he was a psychopath, and he was always pointing guns at everybody and just kind of going nuts because this is what he was dealing with. He lost $200,000 gambling.
Which is insane amount of money at that time.
Back then, right.
It's still a lot of money, but back then, that's a lot.
Yeah. And he was quoted as saying, "War robs you mentally and physically. It drains you. Things don't thrill you anymore. It's a struggle to find something interesting to do." And then he also talked about one time of the treatment the veterans got because You think about Vietnam, but in World War II, too, you just survived this war. Okay, good for you, thanks, right? He said, our dogs were retrained after the war, but not our soldiers. So he wasn't, he's recognizing he has the Medal of Honor and he has a movie contract, but what about all these other guys?
Yeah.
What about all these other guys that were just dumped back into society that didn't have anything to do? But he was constantly chasing a high, chasing a thrill. He started going along on ride-alongs with LAPD. He was made an honorary deputy. He actually took part in an undercover narcotics operations in Houston, Texas.
Damn.
Because of his gambling addictions, they used him undercover because they thought he might have connections to the crime world.
Yeah.
I used to get a newsletter about Audie Murphy, and again, you'd hear all these stories. In 1954, one of his co-stars said they went to a bar in Hemet because he lived out here in Riverside, and a drunk came up and grabbed his buddy Elam by the back of the hair and said, "Hey, you need a haircut," because he thought he was a hippie. And Audie walked right up to this big cowboy and just slugged him right in the chin and knocked him unconscious. And then he stared at his friends until they left. And it was just, Elam was saying, like, this guy was huge, and Audie just hit him. Audie never hesitated. He just hit him. He wasn't scared of anybody. Eventually, he was convinced to play himself into Hell and Back, which was released in 1955. He raised horses, and he would just lose money on them. He did television, he wrote songs, and he wrote poetry. Unfortunately, his marriage fell apart again. Again, that co-star described him as a trigger-happy lunatic who would shoot at anyone or anything because he was just, that was his life. In June of 1962, his contract terminated, so he lost his movie contract after 14 years. By then, it's the early 60s, it's the early Vietnam War. All the heroism that he'd been celebrated before was now shunned, right? Because it was a different time. There was a cultural shift, and the society didn't look up to him anymore. So now he's adrift. He has no money. He's losing his family. He's losing all these things. In 1962, he was assault charges were leveled against him, but later dropped. There was a teenager that was disrespecting one of his female friends outside. So Audie Murphy basically punched the guy. The newspaper article said, Edward Mayer, whom Murphy admitted striking, refused to sign a complaint yesterday. Murphy told police that Mayer and another youth were sitting in their parked cars when he questioned them about lewd phone calls on literature which had been annoying a woman friend. They became abusive, the actor said, so he gave Mayer a little punch in the face when he slapped it out. So he starts to get in trouble, though, and this is one of the things that people don't remember. He ended up getting addicted to sleeping pills, and he was struggling with society because he hated hippies, he hated counterculture, he's struggling to get roles. He's this relic of a time gone by, and he's just struggling with it. When he was in Spain in 1965, he realized he was addicted to sleeping pills, though. So he locked himself in a hotel room and basically just withdrew by himself, and he never touched one ever again after that, because that's just... He said he felt like a junkie, and he didn't want to be like that. During that time, everyone would always comment that he was drunk, but he didn't drink much. It was just the sleeping pills. He was in a state of grogginess, so he decided he wasn't going to do it anymore. So he just kicked all the pills. Because of that, though, he struggled. So he had to sleep in a garage in his house that he converted to a bedroom, so he could sleep with the lights on, so his family didn't have to deal with him being up all night. He ended up losing thousands of dollars gambling. He lost $300,000 in an Algerian oil deal. The IRS had to garnish his wages. Apparently, during this time, his dad reconnected with him or tried to reconnect with him, but he was kind of in and out of his life. In 1969, he was arraigned in bankruptcy court. In 1970, he was charged with assault with intent to commit murder on a dog trainer. So again, he had another incident where one of his girlfriends was unhappy with a job this dog trainer did. She's on the phone with him, and Audie hears the man cussing at the woman. So that's not going to happen. So him and his friend drive down to the guy's house, and then what really happened, we don't know. But over the phone, Audie heard him say that Audie was a phony movie hero and a pipsqueak, talking about Audie. So Audie wasn't going to have that. So according to one account, which was later in court by the victim, testified that Murphy challenged the 200-pound man to a fight, and Goffstein, who was the victim, threw a garbage trolley at him and bruised his ribs. Murphy pitched into Goffstein, pausing only to slap his wife when she intervened. So Audie Murphy shows up, jumps out of the car with the other guy. The victim, who's 200 pounds, threw a garbage can at him, so Audie just started beating the hell out of the guy. The woman intervenes. Audie slapped her off and just kind of beat on the guy.
Yeah.
One of the other versions said that the other guy had actually attacked Goffstein and Audie wasn't involved. But in court, Goffstein claimed that Murphy hit him in the eye and knocked him to the ground and kicked him, then shoved a pistol in his stomach and told him to get into the car. Goffstein broke away and ran into the house, heard a pistol shot, and claimed that Audie had tried to shoot him. So in court, they basically claimed that Audie beat the hell out of this guy and then tried to shoot him. Audie's defense essentially was, I'm Audie Murphy. If I tried to shoot him, I would have killed him, basically. Witnesses later reported they did see someone firing into the air, but they couldn't ID the shooter. So he ended up, there was a trial. You know, they picked jurors. Audie was facing a lot of time in prison for this, but fortunately, after a 10-day trial, which he claimed self-defense, he was found not guilty. And again, he joked about not being able to miss such a big target. But according to the papers I read, when they read the verdict of not guilty, he had tears in his eyes too, because he's probably realizing he's at rock bottom at this point, right? His health started to slip and his insomnia came back. And it's funny when you look at pictures of him. Through most of his life, he looks young, and at the end, he just looks like hell.
Yeah.
His face became bloated. He would black out frequently. He would get infections and get sick often. In 1971, he got on a small plane to check on investments because he was trying to make that money back from that $300,000 investment deal. There was issues, there was rough conditions, and there was, as those small flights often do, the plane ended up crashing in the mountains of Roanoke, Virginia, and there was no survivors. So Audie ended up dying.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he died in a plane crash in 1971. His body was badly mangled in the crash. He was actually thrown out of the plane, and he was, because of the conditions, they weren't able to immediately recognize the bodies. The only way they were able to identify him was the 9-inch scar on his ass from when he was shot by the German sniper. So he was 45 years old when he died, and he was ended up being buried in Arlington Cemetery, which, if you've ever been to Arlington, it's beautiful. And Audie has the second most visited grave in Arlington Cemetery, the first being the eternal flame of JFK.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the story of Audie Murphy. He only lived on this planet for 45 years, but he was able to do quite a bit. Again,
it's always so sad, the after stuff.
Yeah, and that's what's usually glossed over, because if you look him up, you'll see his smiling face in the Hollywood photos. But behind all that was addiction to sleeping pills, was not being able to sleep,
just torture.
was just no excitement in his life, just struggling from one venture to another, and just kind of plodding through life. But
great story, though. 3 episodes worth.
Yeah, 3 we could have made it 4, but I wanted to kind of burn through the end so we could wrap it up. But the biggest thing, and you'll see it when we add the photos, is how small this guy was. I swear to God, I watched Audie to Hell and Back with somebody when it was on TV, and they said, "Look at that little guy. He could never do that." And I, thinking he was just an actor, and I'm like, "No, that's him. That's the real Audie Murphy. He really did these things." And that was 10 years after. Again, To Hell and Back. If you watch it now, it's very dated. It's not a great movie, but just understanding that character playing himself did things way more heroic than the movie actually shows.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts, anything you can think of. Account after account after account. Just a man, I don't want to say a man without fear, a man who never let fear stand in the way of what needed to be done to defend his friends and to continue the mission.
Goes hand in hand, like that story that you tell me, where people may not be good at civilian life, but if we lived in a wartime, they could be legendary.
Yeah, like Grant, like we always talk about.
Right. So that's crazy, man. You wonder how many people that just don't make it through a civilized life. If there was wartime, or we were living back in the day where we're battling, how effective they would be.
Audie needed those extremes, and when they weren't around and when society shifted out from under him, he struggled.
Well, you could imagine living on the edge like that for those 2 years, and then what do you ever do again to get to that?
Exactly.
To get that exhilaration. Man, good stuff.
But what he did do is a legend in American history.
Yes.
He's, in my opinion, the greatest American soldier.
So. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys.
We'll see you guys next week.